I was 10 years old when I almost disappeared. It's been over 2 decades since that winter afternoon, yet I still wake up some nights with my heart pounding, my breath shallow, feeling like I'm back in that park, trapped in that moment. Some childhood memories blur with time, faces fade, details lose their sharpness, but not this one. This memory remains as vivid as the ice beneath my boots that day, as sharp as the wind cutting against my skin. It was early December, and the first real snowfall of the season had blanketed our small town in white. The world felt hushed, muffled by the thick layer of fresh snow. I remember the way it felt under my boots, soft, almost weightless, before compacting into something denser, crunching with each step. The air smelled crisp, tinged with the scent of pine from the trees lining the park's perimeter. My mother had taken me to the local park, a ritual we always did whenever it snowed. She said there was something magical about the first snowfall, something that made everything seem new again. She was one of those parents who believed in letting kids have independence, but also kept a watchful eye. "I'll be right on that bench," she had told me, pointing near the playground. "If you need anything, just wave." Her breath curled in the cold air as she pulled her scarf tighter, her eyes warm but alert. I nodded eagerly, already bouncing on my feet, eager to lose myself in the winter wonderland. The park was nearly empty that day. A few kids ran around, bundled up in thick coats and scarves, their laughter echoing through the quiet expanse as they lobbed snowballs at each other. A teenager trudged along a narrow path, his dog sniffing at the snowbanks. The world felt peaceful, safe. I busied myself with making patterns in the snow, dragging my boots in intricate swirls before sprinting to the swings. My breath came out in thick puffs, a visible reminder of the cold biting at my cheeks. I was completely absorbed in my own world, the simple joy of winter keeping me occupied. I didn't notice him at first, not when he arrived, not when he stood watching. It wasn't until I was climbing onto the jungle gym that I saw him, a man standing near the edge of the park, wearing a dark green jacket and jeans. He wasn't close enough to be suspicious at first, but something about him made my stomach twist. Maybe it was the way he wasn't doing anything. He wasn't walking a dog, wasn't watching a child, wasn't talking to anyone. He was just there, watching. I tried to ignore him, convincing myself he was just waiting for someone. I turned my attention back to playing, pushing the uneasy feeling away. But when I moved to the swings, I saw him again. He was closer this time, standing near the path that led to the parking lot. Still watching. I wasn't scared yet, just uncomfortable. I glanced toward my mom. She was still on the bench, talking to another parent. She hadn't noticed him. Then he moved, slow, deliberate steps, closer, not toward the playground itself, but circling it, inching nearer with each pass. I gripped the cold metal of the swing's chain, my stomach tightening. He wasn't smiling, he wasn't frowning, just staring, his expression unreadable. Then, as I dragged my feet to slow the swing, he raised a hand and waved. I froze. "Hey there," he called out, his voice almost friendly. "Sarah, right?" My heart started hammering against my ribs. That wasn't my name. I didn't respond. "I thought that was you," he continued, taking another step forward. "I know your dad. He told me to come pick you up." That was when the fear really kicked in. My dad? My dad wasn't even in town that day. He was working late. And even if he had sent someone, my mom would have known. I shook my head. "No, you don't." The man's face didn't change. "Sure I do," he insisted. "Come on, let's get you home. It's freezing out here." Every instinct in my body screamed at me that something was wrong. I glanced toward my mom again, about to call for her, when he took another step closer. And then he smiled. That smile wasn't warm. It wasn't kind. It was knowing. I backed up, my boots slipping slightly in the snow. My breath came out faster now, panic rising like a tide. "No," I said louder. "You're lying." For the first time, his expression faltered, just slightly. Then he reached into his pocket. I didn't wait to see what he was reaching for. I turned and ran. The snow slowed me down. My boots sank with every frantic step. Behind me, I heard the crunch of his footsteps. Fast, too fast. I ran toward my mother, but the playground equipment was in the way. I had to go around. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I didn't stop. Then I heard him behind me. "Closer. Mom," I screamed. I didn't know if she heard me at first. Everything felt too loud. The wind, the pounding of my heart, the scrape of my boots against the icy ground. But then I saw her stand up, her face snapping toward me. And just like that, the man stopped. He turned on his heel and walked away, fast but not running, disappearing down the trail toward the parking lot. By the time my mom reached me, he was gone. I was shaking too hard to explain at first. My mom held me close, scanning the park, but he had vanished. She asked if I had seen where he went, if I recognized him, but all I could do was shake my head. The police came, took a report, but there wasn't much to go on. A man in a green jacket, no defining features I could remember, no security cameras in the park, just my word and the lingering, gut-wrenching fear that if I hadn't run, if I had hesitated even a second longer, I might not have made it home. Years later, I still wonder who he was. If he had tried this before, if he ever succeeded, I never saw him again. But every time I walk alone, every time I see someone standing just a little too still, watching just a little too closely, I feel it again. The cold fear, the pounding heart, and the memory of a man who almost took me. It was supposed to be the perfect trip, a quiet getaway in a secluded winter resort, just me and Anna, away from the chaos of city life. The cabin was nestled deep in the mountains of Colorado, surrounded by towering pines and a thick layer of fresh snow. The air smelled of pine and the crispness of winter, the kind of cold that made every breath feel fresh yet sharp. It was picturesque, almost too good to be true. The place had come highly recommended, cozy, private, and fully equipped with everything we could need for a week of peace and relaxation. The winding mountain road that led us here had been nearly empty, the nearest town over an hour away. Anna and I had been looking forward to this trip for months. We needed it. Work had been stressful, life had been overwhelming, and we both craved the isolation, the silence, the time to just be together. We arrived just before sundown, the last rays of light filtering through the trees as we pulled up to the cabin. It was beautiful. A rustic wooden structure with a stone fireplace, large glass windows that overlooked a frozen lake, and a wraparound porch dusted with fresh snow. Inside, it was even better, warm, inviting, with a stocked kitchen, a king-size bed, and a roaring fireplace that crackled with a welcoming glow. The walls were lined with antique wooden shelves filled with old books, their musty scent mingling with the aroma of burning cedar. For the first time in a long while, I felt at ease. We spent the evening cooking, sipping wine, and watching the snow fall through the giant windows. The world outside was a frozen wonderland, untouched and pristine. The moon reflected off the snow, illuminating the tree line in a pale, eerie glow. No cars, no voices, just the occasional sound of the wind rattling through the trees and the distant creaking of ice shifting on the frozen lake. Around midnight, we decided to call it a night. Anna curled up next to me, her head on my chest, her breathing slow and steady. The warmth of the fireplace made the entire cabin feel safe, like we were wrapped in a cocoon, hidden from the rest of the world. I stared at the ceiling for a while, listening to the fire crackle, feeling a strange sense of contentment I hadn't felt in years. Then, just as I was drifting off, I heard it. A noise outside, faint, almost imperceptible, but enough to snap me into full awareness. A footstep in the snow. I lay there, listening. The wind howled, the trees swayed, but that sound, it was different. Deliberate. Someone, or something, was moving outside the cabin. I carefully slipped out of bed, trying not to wake Anna. My heart pounded as I made my way to the window. The porch light cast a dim glow onto the snow-covered ground, but I saw nothing. Just an endless stretch of white and dark trees beyond. The lake in the distance was completely still, its frozen surface unbroken. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe it was just an animal. I was about to turn back when I saw them. Faint footprints in the snow. They led from the tree line, stopping just at the edge of the porch. And then they disappeared. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay calm. Maybe a hiker? Someone lost? But why wouldn't they have knocked? Why wouldn't they have left more tracks leading away? I double-checked the door. Locked. The windows? Locked. The fire flickered, casting shifting shadows across the wooden walls. I peered out one last time, convincing myself it was nothing, then crawled back into bed. Sleep didn't come easily. Morning came with a heavy fog rolling over the mountains. The entire lake had disappeared behind a thick white veil, the world outside eerie and muffled. Anna woke up smiling, completely unaware of my restless night. I decided not to tell her. No need to ruin the trip over what was probably just my imagination. But when I stepped outside to get some firewood, my stomach turned. The footprints were still there. Crisp, clear, and worse, new ones had joined them. They circled the cabin. Someone had been here while we slept. I rushed back inside, bolting the door behind me. Anna looked up, puzzled. "What's wrong?" I hesitated, then told her everything. Her face paled. "Maybe it's just some local messing around," she said, though her voice wavered. "Or an animal?" "An animal doesn't walk in circles around a cabin," I said quietly. That's when we heard it. A creak. Inside the cabin, Anna grabbed my arm, her grip tight. I motioned for her to stay put as I slowly moved through the cabin, checking each room. The kitchen, empty. The bathroom, empty. The living room. A window was open. Not broken, not forced. Just open. I shut it quickly, my pulse hammering. Someone had been inside. "Pack your stuff," I told Anna, my voice barely above a whisper. "We're leaving." She didn't argue. Within minutes, we had thrown everything back into our bags. I grabbed the car keys, my hands shaking as I pulled the door open. Fresh footprints led away from the cabin. Whoever had been here was watching us leave. We sped down the icy road, not looking back. My heart didn't stop pounding until we reached the main road. Civilization in sight. I called the resort owners, told them what had happened. They promised to check it out, but I knew they wouldn't find anything. Because whoever had been there, they knew what they were doing. And they were waiting for someone like us. It's been years since that trip, but I still think about it. About the footprints, the open window, the knowledge that someone had been inside while we slept. And worst of all, the feeling that if I hadn't woken up that first night, we might never have left that cabin. It was supposed to be a simple trip. I had been driving cross-country from New York to Oregon for work, nothing more than a long, lonely road trip through the heart of America. The first couple of days had been uneventful. Long stretches of highway, gas station stops, and the occasional roadside diner for a cup of coffee to keep myself awake. But by the time I reached Montana, things had taken a turn. It was December, and the roads were beginning to ice over as I passed through the remote backroads. The highway ahead had been completely gridlocked due to a massive snowstorm, and I had made a reckless decision to take an alternate route, a road that barely looked traveled, cutting through dense pine forests and vast, empty fields blanketed in white. The deeper I drove, the heavier the snow fell. My wipers struggled to keep up, thick layers of frost forming at the edges of my windshield. The road stretched endlessly in both directions. No sign of gas stations, no towns, no other cars. My fuel gauge was dipping lower with each passing mile, and my phone had lost service miles ago. I kept telling myself it was fine, that I'd reconnect to civilization soon enough, but an uneasy feeling crept into my gut. Something about the silence, the vast emptiness, felt wrong. Then, through the swirling snowfall, I saw them. Dark figures moving along the roadside, half obscured by the thick curtain of white. My hands tightened on the wheel, my breath catching in my throat. I wasn't sure why, but something about the way they walked, slow, deliberate, sent a shiver down my spine. At first, I thought it was a group of hikers, 4 figures trudging through the snow, dressed in heavy winter coats and scarves. They were walking along the side of the road, their heads low against the wind. But something about them didn't sit right. They weren't carrying backpacks or trekking poles, and their movements were slow, almost unnatural. As I got closer, I noticed something else. The way they all turned their heads in unison to watch my car approach. My stomach tightened. Their faces were pale, their eyes dark and empty. There was something wrong. I drove past them without slowing down, my hands gripping the steering wheel tight. I told myself they were just travelers, maybe homeless, trying to get to shelter before the storm got worse. But my gut told me otherwise. Then, a few miles down the road, I saw them again. It didn't make sense. There was no way they could have gotten ahead of me. The road was straight, no turns, no trails leading through the woods, and yet there they were, standing at the edge of the snow-covered road, watching as I approached. A chill ran down my spine. I slammed my foot on the gas, speeding past them. My heart was racing now. Something was very wrong. I checked my rearview mirror, expecting them to fade into the snowfall, but they were still there, still watching. My hands shook on the wheel, and then my headlights caught something up ahead. Another group of people, standing in the middle of the road. I hit the brakes hard, the car skidding slightly before coming to a stop. The figures in front of me didn't move. They stood perfectly still, their faces obscured by scarves and hoods, their bodies rigid. I turned to check behind me. The first group was walking toward my car now, slowly, deliberately. I was trapped. I reached for my phone. No signal, of course. Then one of them stepped forward. A tall man with a hood pulled over his face. He raised his gloved hand and tapped twice on my driver's side window. I didn't move. I barely breathed. He leaned in closer, and through the frost on the glass, I saw his mouth move. "Get out." My instincts screamed at me to run, but how? There was nowhere to go. I couldn't ram through them. Not without wrecking my car. I did the only thing I could think of. I threw the car into reverse and hit the gas. The tires spun for a moment before catching, and I shot backward down the icy road. The figures didn't chase me. They just stood there, watching as I sped away. I kept going, my eyes flicking to the mirror, waiting for them to disappear into the snow. But they didn't. And then, a flash of movement ahead. Another figure stepped onto the road. A woman this time. Her face was pale, her lips cracked and blue from the cold. She looked desperate. She raised her hands, palms facing me. "Help me." I had a split second to decide. Stop and help her, or keep going. But something in my gut screamed that she wasn't what she seemed. I swerved around her, nearly losing control as my tires skidded on the ice. I expected her to jump back, to react in some way, but she didn't move. She just watched as I passed. And then I saw the others. Dozens of them, emerging from the trees, standing in the snow, watching in silence. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I kept driving, pushing the car to its limit, praying that the road would lead me somewhere, anywhere safe. For what felt like hours, I drove blindly through the storm, my mind racing, my hands shaking. Then, just as I was about to lose hope, I saw lights, a gas station, civilization. I pulled in, my car nearly sliding into a pump. I stumbled out, breathless, shaking. The clerk inside gave me a strange look as I ran in, gasping for air. "Are you all right?" he asked. I turned back to the road. It was empty. No figures, no footprints, nothing but endless white snow. I never found out who they were. The police didn't believe me. There were no reports of missing people, no signs of anyone out there in the storm. But I know what I saw. And every winter, when the snow starts falling, I remember their faces, watching, waiting, and I pray that I never take a wrong turn again. I never used to be the kind of person who's scared easily. But that changed the night I found out someone had been watching me. It started on an ordinary winter evening. A brutal snowstorm was predicted to hit our town by nightfall, and like everyone else, I rushed to the grocery store to stock up on essentials. The aisles were packed with frantic shoppers grabbing everything they could. Milk, bread, batteries. I loaded up my cart with canned goods, water, and enough coffee to last a week. The checkout line stretched nearly to the back of the store, but there was no choice but to wait. When I finally got outside, the wind had picked up. The first flakes of snow swirled through the air, and the temperature had dropped sharply. I hurried to my car, tossing the bags into the trunk and slamming it shut. That's when I noticed him. A man stood near the entrance of the store, partially obscured by the shadows. He wasn't shopping. He wasn't waiting for anyone. He was just standing there, his hood pulled low over his face. My gut tightened. I told myself it was nothing, just a random stranger escaping the cold for a moment. But as I got into my car and pulled out of the parking lot, I caught a glimpse of him again. This time, he was watching me. The roads were already getting treacherous, the snow falling heavier by the minute. I kept my eyes on the road, but my mind kept going back to the man. There was something off about him. I had spent years in this town and never seen him before. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe he was just another guy out shopping, trying to survive the storm like the rest of us. Still, when I turned onto my street, a cold sense of unease settled over me. My neighborhood was quiet, the houses blanketed in snow. Most of my neighbors had already retreated inside, their windows glowing warmly against the darkness. As I pulled into my driveway, I checked the rearview mirror. Empty street, no sign of him. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. I grabbed my bags and hurried inside, locking the door behind me. My house was a small, single-story place, modest, but mine. I set the groceries on the counter, then double-checked the locks. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows. That's when I heard it. A faint crunching sound, footsteps in the snow. My stomach dropped. I turned off the kitchen light, peering out through the blinds. At first I saw nothing, just the darkened street and swirling snow. But then movement, a shadow shifting near the edge of my yard. It was him. He stood just beyond the streetlight's reach, still as a statue, facing my house. My pulse pounded in my ears. He wasn't lost. He wasn't just passing through. He was here for a reason. I backed away from the window, my mind racing. Should I call the police? It wasn't illegal to stand on a public street. He hadn't done anything, yet. But every instinct in my body screamed that this wasn't right. Then, he moved. Slowly, deliberately, he stepped forward, his boots crunching through the thickening snow. My breath caught in my throat. He walked up my driveway, stopping just a few feet from my front door. And then, he smiled. I bolted to the door and locked it again, even though I knew it was already secure. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone. 911. The line rang once, twice, then a voice. 911, what's your emergency? There's a man outside my house, I whispered. He followed me home from the grocery store. He's standing in my driveway. Is he trying to enter your home? The dispatcher asked, calm but firm. I peeked out the window. The man was still there, staring at my door. No, but a loud bang. I jumped. He had slammed his palm against the door. My breath hitched. He just hit my door, I hissed into the phone. Stay inside. Officers are on their way. Do not engage with him. Do you have any weapons in the house? A baseball bat, I said, and a kitchen knife. Keep your doors locked and stay somewhere safe. Stay on the line with me. Minutes crawled by. The man didn't leave. He just stood there, his breath visible in the cold air. Every few moments he'd shift his weight, glancing toward the street, waiting for something. Then, the sirens. Flashing red and blue lights reflected off the snow as a patrol car turned onto my street. The man took a step back, then another. As the officers stepped out, he turned and calmly walked away, disappearing into the night. The police searched the area, but found no trace of him. No footprints leading anywhere beyond your property, one of the officers said, frowning. Almost like he just vanished. I didn't sleep that night. The days that followed were uneasy. I kept my doors locked, my blinds drawn. Every noise outside sent my heart racing. The police never found him. Then one morning, as I stepped onto my porch to grab the mail, I saw it. A single set of footprints in the snow, leading from the street right up to my bedroom window. And next to them, etched into the frost on the glass, was a message. See you soon.